Always got the vibe, got the vibe, got the vibe, got the...
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I know we haven't spoken for some time, but today's video is going to be about the last 3 weeks, I believe, that I've been playing on Hustler Casino Live. I think the last time I covered a Hustler session was from like five different sessions ago. So what I'm going to do is talk about the most interesting and also the biggest pots from my last 3 weeks. Also, worth noting, I am in Pismo Beach, just having a good time with a friend for his birthday. Reason being is this week is the $1 million game on Hustler, which I'm not playing. A little too out of my budget, so taking the week off to enjoy some California coast. It's beautiful out here. But before we go down there and enjoy Memorial Weekend, we're gonna talk about some poker. So lots of swings, lots of results coming up. Stay tuned because there's a bunch of hands, and I'll check in with you guys right after the poker. Guys, lots of hands to go over today, so these are going to be relatively quick. Can't be going into a deep analysis for each hand unless you guys wanted like a 2-hour video. I, for one, don't want that. So here we go. In this first interesting hand, I've got Queen 5 suited. Not the best hand, of course, but this is Hustler. This is how things go. L calls for 200. I limp along on the button. A couple other limpers, and then 3 coin makes the minimum raise from the straddle to 400. This hand is already an LOL moment. L makes the call, I call on the button, the other players call too, so 5 of us go to a flop, which is 10-3 deuce with 2 diamonds out there. I've got myself the queen high flush draw. Action checks to 3 coin, who continues with his aggression for 600, and now L raises to $3,000. I think he could be pouncing on some weakness, and I of course have a flush draw, so I stick around for $3,000. 3 coin calls as well, so the 3 of us go to a turn, which is the 5 of hearts, now giving me a pair to go along with my flush draw. Good thing about this is if L was being aggressive with a higher flush draw, we now have a pair. So yeah, beating all potential bluffs. 3 coin checks, and now L shoves all in for $12,000. Now this is where the hand gets even more interesting than it already is, where 3 coin turns over a card now while the action is on me. It seems he didn't know it was my turn, and he turns over the 4 of clubs. Now what that means is he cannot have a flush draw himself. So yeah, even if he's got a straight or whatever, we are drawing to potentially win this pot. That's assuming that L doesn't have us in terrible shape with a higher flush draw, but like I said, he could just have a higher flush draw, which means my 5 is good. So time to get the gamble on. Don't play Queen 5 suited just to fold a pair and flush draw, so I make the call. 3 coin also makes the call, so we have a 3-way all in. God, this is getting a little bit kind of tongue twisty with 3 coin and 3 players at 3 ways and all that. But the river is the 4 of spades. That does not improve my hand whatsoever, but it turns out somehow a measly pair of 5s is good enough to beat both of my opponents in this hand. So we're going to start this vlog with a ridiculous pot, but it does go our way. This next hand is a lot more straightforward. In this one, Tom raises to 400. PP makes the raise to 1400. Then it gets to me in the small blind. I've got pocket jacks. Of course, going to be continuing, and with a hand as strong as jacks, it's going to be through the form of a raise. So I make it $4,800. Action gets back to Tom now, and he decides with his 10-6 suited that it's time for liftoff. He puts in another raise. He makes it 11,200. PP gets out of the way, but of course with pocket jacks, I can't fold just yet. So I make the call, and we go to a flop, heads up out of position of King 6-5 rainbow. Not the best flop for pocket jacks considering all this pre-flop action. I check it over to him. He does bet really small though, $3,200, and we are still beating hands like pocket tens, ace queen, maybe ace 5 suited, hands of that nature, so can't fold a hand as strong as jacks. just yet versus this size. So I make the call. Of course, not loving the situation, but still, I think everything is standard so far. Turn card is the 10 of hearts. As you guys can see, that is a disaster for me as Tom has turned 2 pair. But of course, in the moment, I figured it was mostly a brick unless he had pocket 10s. He does check it back, however. Go to a river, which is the 8 of diamonds. Now, I think you can check or bet really small, like a block bet. I think if he had a strong hand, he would have continued betting on the turn. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him pot control with, like I said on the flop, ace queen, ace 5 suited. Maybe the occasional 7-6 suited, hands of that nature. So I put in a small bet around 10% of the pot. 4,200, but now Tom thinks for a bit and shoves all in for 25K. Kind of a frustrating spot, but I could have many better hands to call with. So after some thought, I let it go. And we avoid losing a whole lot more with pocket jacks. And that brings us to the last interesting hand of this particular stream. Well, you could call it interesting. For me, it was just a little bit painful, but long story short, I'm going to skip any deep thoughts here. We got pocket kings versus someone else who had pocket aces. Now, it was a little bit different in the sense that we didn't get it all in pre-flop. Instead, we did play some post-flop, but yeah, ended up losing the maximum versus L with his pocket aces. We lose nearly a $100,000 pot here. And that concluded this particular stream, which started off pretty good, and then near the end it went poorly. I think I lost around 30K on this particular night, but that's all right. There is much more poker left to be played. Let's move to stream number 2. So here we are playing 50, 100, no limit. However, in this particular hand, we are playing some stand-up, and for that reason, I am in the double straddle, the triple straddle. I can't even keep track, but I am in the $800 straddle. Steve limps in on my left, and then Arden in one of the straddles raises it up to 2,600. Action's on me now. I've got position and Jack 10 offsuit. One of those things is pretty good. One is pretty bad. But I'm going to try to ignore the fact that Jack 10 offsuit isn't the strongest hand and get active here. I raise it up to $8,000, hoping to put Arden in a tough spot out of position with whatever marginal hands she might have. Of course, sometimes we'll be running into some premium holdings, but I'm just hoping that's not the case in this moment. Steve lets go of his pocket sixes, and when it gets back to Arden, she makes the call. At this point, I'm expecting to not have the best hand. Now, as you guys can see, Jack High is actually good here, but Arden's hand is more playable, so it's a fair fight. Heads up to a flop, which comes down Jack 7 deuce rainbow. Not bad when you get out of line pre-flop with Jack 10 offsuit and flop top pair. Arden checks, and I continue for a small size of 5,400. Now, this is where the hand starts to take off as Arden puts in a somewhat unorthodox check raise to 14,300. Maybe just thinking that I've got ace high, and most of the time that would be a good play against ace high because I probably fold. Can't say for sure, but either way, I've got top pair in this case, so I'm going nowhere. I make the call. Turn card definitely makes me feel more comfortable about the situation. It's the 10 of spades, giving us top 2 in a somewhat undeserving fashion, but then again, you could argue if you get out of line pre-flop with Jack 10, you deserve to hit something. Even better news is that now Arden thinks about it for a bit and jams all in for nearly $40,000. I, of course, make the call right away. If she's got a set or 9-8, you could go ahead and take this pot. Turns out she's bluffing, and we run it twice and hold on both boards versus her straight draw. So just like that, we win a $121,000 pot. Not a bad start to this stream whatsoever. This next hand is once again against Arden. In this one, there's a raise to 500 from Brittany. Arden makes the raise to 2,500, and I look down at pocket kings in the big blind, worthy of a raise, of course. If Jack 10 offsuit is qualified, pocket kings definitely are. I make it 8,000, same size as with the Jack 10 offsuit. But now when it gets back to Arden, she puts in another raise. She makes it 19,000. This is already a somewhat strange spot because even though pocket kings are an amazing pre-flop hand, one thing to keep in mind is when you're playing pretty deep, no hand is worth going nuts pre-flop with. Even aces seems to call a lot. I mean, going all in with aces pre-flop is never that bad of a thing when you get the chance, but you guys hopefully get what I'm saying. Now we have a decision to make. We don't have position, but I don't really know if jamming all in makes much sense. Instead, I'd rather just call and keep options open. If she's bluffing, we give her more rope. If an ace comes on the flop, maybe we can navigate accordingly. So I make the call and we go to a flop, which is kind of a weird one. It's ace, ace, 8. So we now lose to any pre-flop bluffs she might have had that contain an ace, but at the same time, ace-king is extremely unlikely considering that 2 kings and 2 aces are accounted for. I check it, and Arden checks it back, which I didn't really expect. Are we really up against pocket aces? Might she be playing flopped quads this way? Impossible, because the turn is another ace. It's the ace of spades giving us the nut full house. Now we're only losing to quads. I check it again, however, just like I would if I had pocket tens or even pocket jacks, hands like that. And now Arden puts in a bet of 10,000. Don't see much point in raising. Folding is out of the question, so I make the call and we see an inconsequential 5 on the river. I check it a third time, and Arden jams all in for 40,000. Well, if she's got quads, congratulations, take the money. I make the call, and as long as we don't see an ace, we should be good. Sure enough, from across the table, I can see her turn over 2 picture cards. It looks like queens, but it actually is just pocket kings. So we end up splitting versus the other set of pocket kings. Interesting hand, 142K in the middle, but all that means is we're chopping up a few $100 each. And with that, we move to the last interesting hand of this stream, where Mike X raises to 500 from early position. Arden calls, Ling Ling calls, I call in late position with pocket threes. Steve calls and Dylan calls as well. So 6 ways to a flop, which is amazing. Ace 5-3 with 2 diamonds. Draw heavy board. We've got bottom set. That's the stuff dreams are made of. Dylan starts with a check. Mike X continues for 1,000. Arden calls. And of course, I am going to put in the raise, much like I would if I had a straight draw or a flush draw that wants to get aggressive. This time, however, no draw. I've got a super strong hand. I make it 4,700. Mike X thinks for a bit and calls. And then Arden makes the call as well. So we're going to a turn looking for a clean card, but that's not what we get. It's the 10 of diamonds. Unfortunate, because I think it's pretty likely at least one of these players has a flush draw. As long as neither of these guys leads out, we are going to get the chance to check it back, which is exactly what I do when the action gets to me, hoping the board pairs, and sure enough, it's the dream card, another ace. So at least one of these guys might have an ace, perhaps even a flush, and of course we are laying here in the weeds with a full house. Actions on Mike X now, who contemplates his options before announcing all in for just over double the pot size. A giant all in, which I think makes sense. You know, if someone's got an ace, they're going to pay him off. Arden folds, but unfortunately for Mike X, I don't have an ace. Instead, I've got a boat, which is good enough to beat his queen high flush. And we win a $91,000 pot to end this night. This particular stream went a lot better than the previous one. I believe I ended up winning a good chunk of money, but I'll save the summary of results for the outro of this video. Moving on to the third stream of this vlog. Once again, this one is not too exciting. A bunch of raising happens pre-flop, and I end up getting all in with pocket queens versus ace king offsuit against an unknown Howard. Haven't played with him before, but just a classic flip that we end up winning. So start off this session up around $15,000. However, it doesn't take too long before things go the other direction. In this one, I raise it up to 500. A bunch of people call, and then that same player, Howard, jams all in from the straddle. Now, the key factor here is that we're playing stand-up, and he's one of the last 2 remaining players. So I've got ace-3 suited. I feel like he could be getting out of line with a much better hand, like any other ace with a bigger kicker, but he might also have king high, you know, queen 10 suited, these random hands that just go crazy pre-flop, hoping that everyone is weak. So it's pretty close. Folding would be totally reasonable, but I decide to give some action here to a player who I just won a big pot against. Turns out, though, he has ace-9 suited, and we don't chop and we don't win. Instead, we lose this one and give those winnings right back. And with that, we move to the last noteworthy hand of this particular stream. I was pretty card dead on this day, but we do pick up pocket kings to round out this night. There's a raise to 200, a couple of callers, and I make it 1,400 on the button. Now Dylan gets out of line with ace-10 offsuit from the small blind. My man's is coming after me here a little bit, but unfortunately for him, it's poor timing, as I've got the number 2 best possible hand. So I just rip it all in there. He's only got like 7K left. He's probably going to have to call with whatever hand he raised to 4,500 with. And of course, he does realize that after some thought, although he's not loving it. We are all in pre-flop versus ace-10 offsuit. We flop top set, though, so it's not looking good for Dylan. He does have the ace of clubs, though, and there are 2 clubs out there. Turn card's an action card, if you will. I mean, there's no more action to be had, but you get my point. It's the queen of clubs, giving him a straight draw and the nut flush draw. Not like this. Please, not like this. Yep, exactly like this. The river's the deuce of clubs, and we end up losing to the backdoor nut flush, which is pretty hilarious, as you guys can see. Not so much for me, since, you know, that's 23K going the wrong direction, but nice hand, Dylan. If you're getting in there with ace-10 offsuit, you're gambling it up, you deserve to win sometimes. That's how it goes. Let's move to the 4th stream here. There's a race to 300 from L. Sashimi calls, and I've got ace-queen on the button. Worthy of a raise, I think, so I make it 1,500 to go. Action's on George now in the big blind, who cold calls the 1,400. Probably indicative of some middling strength hand, maybe like pocket 7s, you know, stuff like that. Action's back on L now, who gives it some thought before raising to $6,200. I've played with L enough times to kind of catch a vibe, and my vibe here was that he was getting after it. Probably doesn't have anything too good. A little out of line, trying to steal my raise, and George's cold call. Unfortunately for L, I've actually got a really strong hand here. Ace queen, I mean, yeah, there are better hands, but in this particular instance, I think it's a powerful couple of cards. Question is, do we want to just call or raise again? L's got 24K behind, and I think we can force George out of this pot relatively easily, since he just called my re-raise a couple of turns ago. So I jam all in for 40K effective, and now things get a little bit weird. Not what I expected, but George says the hell with it. I call, and then L does fold. So perhaps we were right about L. He did just have king 9 offsuit, but George was cold calling pre-flop with ace king. That's not what I expected whatsoever, and just like that, we're playing a huge pot in terrible shape. That's something I definitely try to avoid when I'm playing poker. I mean, I'll gamble here and there, but getting all in pre-flop with a heavy disadvantage, that's not the stuff I really love. But we've lost quite a few of these from being on the other side in recent history. Perhaps this time we can be the ones to suck out. We decide to run it twice. First board brings no help to either player. But on the second board, we flop a queen. No justice in this game. George does not end up improving to a better hand. Well, I mean, he does turn an ace, but that gives me aces up. And we end up chopping. And just like that, we split L's pre-flop raise. We each make like a little over $3,000 in this hand. Completely undeserving. And it kind of goes to show how many swings are in this game that just make very little sense. You know, sometimes you'll play poorly and things go fine. Other times you play well and things go terribly. But I guess that's kind of why we love the game. You know, you never know what's going to happen. Moving right along without getting too philosophical, in this next hand, we've got a much worse hand than ace queen. King deuce. Seems I have not learned my lesson. In this one, there's a raise to $300, and I re-raise to $1,000 next to act. I'm trying to just isolate Sashimi in position, but that's not what ends up happening, as Francisco cold calls my re-raise, George calls my re-raise, and Sashimi comes along as well. So the 4 of us go to a flop, which is queen, 7, 5, but there are 2 spades out there. Sashimi checks, and I think you can go either way here between betting or checking. Reasons for betting are we've just got king high and lots of equity with the flush draw, but of course reasons for checking is that there are 3 other opponents who have shown interest in this hand, so probably not going to get many bluffs through on a board like this. However, I decide to bet this time, 2,100, see what happens. I feel like good things might come, until Francisco immediately punishes by raising to 6,000 on my direct left. George gets out of the way. Sashimi folds her top pair. Now it's back on me. Well, now this hand just became fairly straightforward. We're not going anywhere with the flush draw, but also don't want to raise. So I make the call, looking for some help, and we get some right away. It's the 4 of spades on the turn. It's funny because I was just talking to a friend about this recently, how for some weird reason it feels like I haven't made any flushes in the last 3 months. Suddenly this week I'm hitting every flush draw, it feels like. It's just funny how poker goes sometimes. But anyway, turn card is a spade. I decide to lead out now, mostly expecting Francisco to check whatever top pair, two pair, or set he might have raised with on the flop. So I don't want it to go check, check. I lead for 8,000, looking for a clean river. If he calls that, we can get the rest of the chips in. But instead, Francisco cuts out his stack and decides the hell with it. I am all in for 20K. Of course, I make the call. We've got the second nuts, and it turns out Francisco is drawing dead with king queen. Yeah, just like that, we win a $57,000 pot. King deuce coming through, getting the job done. This next hand, however, is a real one. Real hand alert here. I don't only play speculative holdings. I raise it to 300. A couple of players call before Henry re-raises to 2,300. Back to me now, and of course, we're going to be putting in another raise with pocket queens. Could occasionally just call in position, considering that we're both pretty deep here, but this time I raise, I make it 7,000. Unfortunately, as you guys can see, Henry actually has it this time. He's got the aces. For that reason, he puts in another raise. He makes it $22,300. I'm already not in love with the situation, but we do have position and a premium holding, so can't go anywhere just yet. Still beating ace king or whatever other bluffs Henry might have. Granted, I don't think there are many bluffs. Now that he's put in $22,000 out of position, probably his only bluff is ace king at this point, maybe ace queen, but we've got two queens. Either way, I make the call. We go to a flop, which is not great. King 9-4. At this point, we are also losing to ace king, if that is what he has. He bets small, and I just let it go right away. As it turns out, what I thought was a bad flop is actually a great flop because it allowed me to avoid losing too much money. Queens versus aces. Say the flop had come a bunch of low cards, it might have gotten dangerous. Instead, we only lose 22K. Not too shabby. A few hands later, this one comes up where George raises to 500. Henry once again puts in the re-raise to 2,000. Now it's on me in the big blind with queen jack suited. Against a raise and a re-raise, I think just letting go of queen jack suited is completely reasonable. But also mixing it up once in a while makes sense, you know, to balance out the times I've got real hands like pocket queens or aces, ace king, stuff like that. So I do decide to go for it this time. I make it 7,000. Now George cold calls, or I guess he doesn't cold call because he already raised, but he calls the 7,000. Back to Henry now, and once again, he's got a real hand. So that's once more poor timing from me, and he is going to put in another raise. Gotta say, I don't know if I completely love this ace king offsuit with so many chips behind between me and Henry. Might get a little bit dangerous, but he does go for it. He makes it 27,000, and I can't blame him. He's got the best hand between all three of us, so can't say too many bad things about this raise. However, much like L, I've played a lot against Henry, and for whatever reason, I was just getting ace-king vibes. Now, if that's not fish mentality, I don't know what is. But I'm just giving you guys my honest, in-the-moment thoughts. So I make the call with queen-jack suited, getting my gamble on a little bit because, let's be honest, even if I'm somehow right about him having ace-king, it's still ahead of queen-jack suited. So what the hell difference does it make? But whatever, I make the call. George calls as well. Granted, there is a bit more analysis to this particular decision. We are pretty deep, and my hand doesn't interact too terribly versus ace king, but you know, don't want to get too nerdy. So I make the call. George is in there as well for an all-in. Now what that means is there's not going to be much point bluffing in this hand versus Henry because we would be bluffing into a dry side pot. Even if we could force him out, we still have to beat George, who's all in. I just thought that might be worth mentioning. But either way, we flop great. Queen 10-9, no diamonds, but we do have top pair with the open-ended straight draw. I check it, and Henry checks it back, which is somewhat surprising. The turn card is the 4 of hearts, and now I decide to bet small for some protection. If he does have 2 overs, that means he's got a straight draw as well. So I put in a bet around a quarter pot, $20,000. Henry thinks for a bit and eventually does let go of his ace-king. George has himself king 10 suited, so we are in good shape to win a decent sized pot here. And sure enough, the river, which we run twice, does not improve his hand. One of them is an 8, the other is a 7, and top pair is good on both boards. Well, I did make a straight on the first one, but yeah, we win this one, 65K heading our way. Now, that brings us to the last 2 streams of the day, which were by far the most interesting in my opinion. Man, there are a lot of hands today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to take a quick break here to ask you guys for a thumbs up. I never do this, but there are just so many hands here that my buddy Joey is going to be editing for us. I think at the bare minimum for him, we should drop a like on this video. I know I'm doing it. Yeah, I like my own videos. What of it? In this hand, I've got Ace Queen suited. We are playing against Trick Time, who is an action player from Houston, Texas, if I'm not mistaken. In this one, Action Dan raises up the action. The $400 straddle is on. He makes it $1,200. Crypto Drew calls next to act, and I re-raise with Ace Queen of Spades to $5,000 in late position. Rate to have the best hand most of the time, and even if I don't, it is quite a playable one. Action's on Trick Time now, though, and he puts in another raise. He makes it $14,200. Well, we are both pretty deep here, so after the other guys get out of the way, I make the call in position. Let's see what happens. Flop comes down 9-8-6 with one spade. Not much going on for me aside from some potential backdoor straight, backdoor flush type vibes going on. But that being said, Trick Time is going to be bluffing here at least sometimes. So when he puts in the bet of 11,700, I decide to float and see what happens on the turn. If he's got Ace King, we could steal it away, and maybe once in a blue moon, we might even have the best hand. Of course, we could also improve if he does have a real hand, like, you know, an overpair. Turn card is great. It's the Jack of Spades, one of the best turn cards we could have hoped for. We now have a straight draw and a flush draw, plus 2 overcards. Not really sure how live these overcards might be, but nevertheless, we do have other ways of improving. So this time he checks it over to me. And of course, it's time to start betting, much like I would if I had, say, a hand like pocket tens or a set, 2 pair, all sorts of stuff. Got to balance that out with hands like these. I put in a bet around 1/3 the size of the pot, 18,000. Just thinking to myself, how much would I bet if I had a good hand? And it turns out that's all it takes to get the job done. Really don't envy his spot here with Ace King offsuit. You kind of just have your hands tied and got to let it go. He does realize that and makes the fold, and we take down this pot with this cute little semi-bluff, $28,000 profit going our way to start off the night. This next hand, much more straightforward. There's a limp from Brittany for 200, and then Action Dan raises to 800. Crypto Drew calls in the small blind, and I look down at aces in the big blind. Always nice when there's a raise and a call ahead of you, and you look down at aces. Of course, I am going to be raising myself. I make it 5,000. And unexpectedly, Brittany announces all in for 17K. Action Dan and Drew get out of the way. Sadly for Brittany, she is running into it here. Pocket aces versus Ace King. She's in some bad shape, especially after the flop comes down Ace 5 Deuce Rainbow. We've got a 99% chance of winning this one, similar to the hand earlier where I flopped top set versus Dylan. It's not looking good for Brittany, but the turn comes a 4, so a 3 would give her a chop, and the river's a 3. Out of nowhere, we end up chopping this pot in an underwhelming fashion, or maybe it's pretty exciting. It depends who you're rooting for. But yeah, this hand was pretty funny. Kind of sucks to chop aces versus Ace King, obviously, but you got to appreciate some of the comedy that goes down here at Hustler Casino Live from time to time. Moving right along, in this next one, Action Dan raises to 300. Crypto Drew makes the call, and I re-raise on the button with Jack 10 suited. Could just call on the button with a playable hand like this, but I think it's also a good hand to re-raise with. So I make it 1,300. Action Dan folds, but Crypto Drew makes the call again. Not really what I was expecting, but that's quite okay as we go to a flop of King, Queen, Deuce with 2 clubs. So no flush draw going on, but we do have the open ender. He checks, I bet 900, and he makes the call. Turn card is the dream. The 9 of spades, putting another flush draw out there, and of course giving me the stone cold nuts as it is right now. Crypto Drew checks it again, and of course I'm going to continue betting. Now, if I had bluffs in this situation after betting small on the flop, I think I would size up here, so that's what I do. I put in a bet of $6,000 over betting the pot. And I'm happy to see Crypto Drew does not snap fold. In fact, he makes the call relatively quickly, so things are looking pretty good here. Hoping for a clean river, and it's exactly what the doctor ordered. 4 of diamonds. I mean, you can't ask for a much better river than that. And on top of that, Crypto Drew now leads out for $11,000, leaving himself around 7K behind. I'm going to go all in here. as you guys could probably guess. That's what I do. Crypto Drew doesn't love it, but he says he doesn't have enough behind to fold. And it's definitely true with two pair. He's just got to make the call, which he does. And we end up winning this one. Over $50,000 pot going our way. Things going back in the right direction after that pocket aces debacle. In this next one, Nico's limps in for 400. Brittany limps as well. And then Action Dan raises to 2,200 from the button. Action's on me now with ace jack suited in the small blind. Definitely worth a re-raise versus a button open. And it's Action Dan. He plays a lot of hands. So ace jack suited, no brainer re-raise here. I make it 7,000. But then Nico's limp re-raises all in for 15K. Brittany folds, Action Dan folds, and of course there is no escape since this is essentially a min raise. Got a call with any two cards here. That's what I do. But of course not loving the situation as we're probably not in good shape considering that he limped and then jammed all in after all this action. Sure enough, he's got pocket queens, and we don't win either board after running it twice. The second board kind of looks like we might have won, but yeah, he's got a straight on that one. So 33K going towards Nico's. Nice hand, man. The very next hand, I look down at King 7 suited on the button. I raise it to 300 before L makes it 1,400 out of the big blind. I've got a suited king in position. Definitely not going anywhere just yet. I decided to just call and see what happens on the flop. Although I think occasionally putting in another raise button versus big blind wouldn't be the worst thing ever. But I call and we go to a flop of King 10-7. Out of nowhere, flopping two pair with a hand like this. Not what I was expecting, but here we go. L continues for $2,000. I decide to just call. Could raise once in a while, but a king high board like this, King 10-7, I think is probably better for the pre-flop re-raiser. So shouldn't be raising too often. At least those are my thoughts real time. Not sure how entirely accurate that might be, but I make the call and we see the ace of spades on the turn. Not my favorite card as Queen Jack now gets there and ace king, pocket aces, ace 10, these sorts of hands are now beating us. However, the pot is 7,000 and L puts in a bet of 3,000, which is just under half pot. And I take that to mean that most likely he doesn't have the best hand ever. Maybe ace jack, ace queen, really any ace. I feel like if he had a really strong hand, he might have sized up here and try to set up some more value on the river. So feeling pretty good about the situation, but still don't really want to raise. So I call again. And we see a good river card. It's the deuce of diamonds, which shouldn't really change anything. All flushes missed, and there are some straight draws that missed as well, like say a hand like Queen 9 suited or 9-8 suited, hands like that. However, this is where the hand gets kind of crazy. The pot is 13K, and L jams all in for over 26K. That's double the size of the pot. Okay, so yeah, we've got a strong hand, obviously, two pair, but this is not an easy spot by any means because he's essentially representing either a total bluff or a hand that's better than mine. He's not shoving two pair like 10-7 or 10 deuce suited in this fashion, but he definitely might with ace king, maybe even ace 10. But yeah, this bet really just indicates sets like pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket 10s, or queen jack. That's about it. We lose to all those hands, of course, but we are beating any potential bluffs. The question is, how often are people ripping in their entire stack for double the size of the pot on the river with a stone cold bluff? And even here on Hustler Casino Live, it does not happen too often whatsoever. So I think about this one for quite a bit, but eventually just decide that my hand is too strong, especially the way I've played it by just calling down. Doesn't look like I have much, which might induce L to bluff a little more aggressively than he otherwise might. And we also have removal to pocket kings, ace king, and I guess pocket 7s. Hand is just too strong. Don't have any clubs, don't have any spades, and we have removal to value hands. So whatever, L. If you've got it, you got it. I make the call. And I'm happy to hear he says you win. So yeah, we end up winning a $66,000 pot. Credit to L for going for it. Not too many people do that. It's a pretty cool play, but unfortunately for him, he ran into a strong hand here. In this next hand, we've got aces once again. In this one, there's a bunch of re-raising pre-flop, but Trick Time is the only one who comes along, and we go to a flop of queen 7 deuce with a diamond out there. I bet small, and he makes the call, so it's looking like good news. Maybe he's got king queen suited or queen jack suited. Turn card doesn't look too dangerous, so I continue betting, but this time he just folds. Unfortunately, he had king jack suited, but would have been pretty sweet if he flopped top pair. No such luck this time, but you know, can't complain when aces don't get cracked, at least. And with that, we move to the last fun hand of this particular stream, which was quite the wild one. In this one, Matt opens to 600, and Brittany re-raises to 3,000. Action Dan cold calls the re-raise from the third blind, and I am in the final blind, or the final straddle, I should say, with 6-4 suited. Now, like 90% plus of the time should just fold versus a raise, a re-raise, and a cold call. But that said, my image is good. I've shown down a lot of winners today, and Brittany is pretty deep. I don't think she's going to want to get all in pre-flop unless she's got aces or kings. So I decide to pounce on what I think might be a good situation. Worth noting that this is completely unnecessary, but I do go for it this time. I make it 9,500, and things develop accordingly as Matt gets out of the way. Brittany calls, and Action Dan unfortunately also calls. I was hoping he would fold, but we do go to a flop of jack 10-6, so that means we've got bottom pair. But unless these guys flop to set, we might be able to win this one with some continued aggression. So Brittany checks, Action Dan checks, I bet $10,000, around a third of the pot size. Brittany makes the call, and Action Dan gets out of the way. Looking for a 6 or a 4 potentially, but we are still beating hands like, you know, ace king or maybe like ace x of hearts. She might have 9-8 suited once in a while. However, the turn is the king of diamonds, and after she checks, I decide to check it back. We go to a river, which is an interesting one. It's the jack of clubs. So the pot's now 50K. Action's on me, and what do we do here with just a 6? I was very tempted to just check it back, because if she had a missed flush draw, that means that we're winning. If she had 9-8 suited, we are also winning. If she has ace queen, of course she's got a straight, and if she's got a jack, she's not going to fold. However, I feel like if she had a jack or ace queen, she would have bet. So I think most likely she's got, let's say, a pocket pair like 9s or 8s. She might have a hand like ace 10 suited. She might even have pocket queens once in a while. All these sorts of holdings that are decent enough to get to showdown, but don't necessarily want to bet. And I think against those holdings, we can get away with a bluff. So yeah, I decide to turn my 6 into a bluff, kind of thinking that it's probably not good here or good enough to check back too often. A little too optimistic to just hope that she has a missed straight or flush draw. So I do put in a bet of 22,000. And Brittany snap calls, so complete disaster strikes here. We lose a huge pot, 93,000. Not necessary. Like I said, these are plays that you could just never make and it would be fine. But on the other side of that coin, these are action games, these are action players, and I like to mix it up and, you know, tangle with them, because if I'm just sitting here waiting for super good hands, kind of boring. So yeah, we give some back here. Kind of unfortunate that she had ace king. Would have been pretty sweet to see what happens if she had ace 10 or pocket 9s, maybe pocket queens. Maybe we could have got away with it there, but ace king just too strong of a hand. She makes the call and we lose a huge pot to end this night. But still ended up winning on this day, and good news is we have one more stream left, which was the best one by far. All right, here we go. Last stream of the vlog. If you guys are still here, good for you, because these are some of the best hands of tonight's video. In this one, we raised it up to $300 on the button. This is High Stakes Friday. We're playing 5,100. No straddle on yet, though. Make it 300. Sashimi calls in the small blind with 6s, and Trick Time defends the big blind with king 9 offsuit. We go to a flop of king 10-10. 2 hearts out there. They check to me. Good board to continue bluffing. I bet 300. Sashimi calls with her pocket 6s. That's pretty hopeful of her. Trick Time calls as well with his king, of course. Turn card is the queen of diamonds. They both check to me. And this is an unorthodox bluff candidate, but we could have a 10. We could have ace jack. We could have pocket queens. We could have all sorts of strong holdings, whereas both of these guys just called in the blinds, so they probably don't have too much going on. So I decide to continue bluffing. 1,400, hoping it also looks stronger that I'm betting into both players after they called on the flop. And it looks like that might be the case, because Sashimi gets out of the way. Trick Time, however, does not. He calls again. We go to a river, which is the 5 of hearts, bringing in the flush, and we are sitting here with ace 7 offsuit, no heart. Trick Time checks it a third time. And well, I think it's a good opportunity to go for it. If he had a flush draw, he probably wouldn't be check calling out of position. If he had a 10, he would have raised at some point. I think it's most likely we're just up against a king, and a king is going to hate facing another bet here. At least that's what I'm hoping. So I put in a bet of 6,000 when he checks to me, and now he's in a tough spot. He thinks about it for quite some time, but eventually folds. So we get this one through and start off the night with this nice little bluff. And this next one, we are once again going to be battling versus Trick Time. I decide to limp along from the big blind. When it gets to me, I've got 9-6 suited. Probably just going to be limping all my hands, blind versus blind, and going from there. Trick Time checks, and we get a great flop. 9-9 deuce. We've got 3 of a kind in a disguised fashion, but I'm trying to ignore that. I lead out for 200. I would probably do this with all my hands, so I don't want to become predictable and start checking when I flop trips and betting when I don't have anything. So I put in 200, and I'm happy to see Trick Time makes the call. Turn card is the ace of hearts, and I think if I continue betting, it'll just look like I'm full of it. So I put in $1,000. I mean, also it's worth saying that, you know, if I had any sort of reasonable bluff, I would continue betting. So doing the same thing with trips here, I make it 1,000. This is where the hand kind of gets off the rails, as Trick Time, perhaps sensing some weakness, goes for a raise to $3,200. Of course, we might be up against pocket deuces or a better 9, but I think what's really going on here is Trick Time thinks I don't have anything, so he's trying to capitalize on that. So, of course, the best play is to just call and see what he wants to do on the river. That's what I do. Looking for a clean card, I hope, that doesn't kill the action, and that's exactly what we get. It's the king of diamonds. Shouldn't change anything. I check it to him, hoping he continues betting, most likely with what I assume is a bluff. And sure enough, he does bet, and it's all in. 13,000 into a 7K pot. That's a double pot-sized jam. If he's got me beat, so be it. I snap call, and he says you win. So we take this one down as well. 35,000. Got to give credit to my opponents in this vlog. People are going for it. People are bluffing, and I think that's pretty cool because it's never fun to play in a game where everyone just has value all the time. In this next one, Action Dan raises up the action to 600. I believe at this point we have officially changed the game to 50, 100, 200. So straddle is now part of the blinds. Clue now re-raises on the button, and I look down at pocket aces in the small blind. Of course, I'm going to be raising myself. No need to get fancy. I make it 5,000. Action Dan makes the call. Clue does not, though. So we go heads up to a flop, which is good and bad at the same time. It's ace, king, queen. That means we've got top set. But sometimes it's not good to flop top set with aces. You know, you'd rather just get a low board and pray that the other guy also has an overpair. But whatever, I'm just going to continue betting small. This is a good board for me after all. Action Dan makes the call, and we go to a turn which is the 8 of hearts. I decide to continue betting here because I have top set. It's not rocket science. I put in $6,000. Action Dan once again makes the call, so going to a river, which is good news. It's the 8 of diamonds. So just in case we were up against Jack 10, we now improve, but wasn't really expecting to be up against that. Instead, what I think is more likely is he's got a flush draw or, you know, some sort of straight draw. And I don't really know how much value we can continue getting from a worse hand here. We have all this removal to top pair, so I decided to just check it and see what he wants to do. Turns out he just checks it back with pocket jacks, and we win this pot. So not the biggest hand ever. You know, we probably got the max value versus a hand like jacks on ace, king, queen flop. But anyway, we win this one. Ace is full. Always feels nice to make top full house with that hand. Moving right along to the next one, which is the hand of the night. In fact, it's the hand of the year so far for me, and that is no exaggeration. Here we go. In this hand, Trick Time opens the button to 1,500 before it gets to me in the $400 straddle, looking down at 10-8 suited. Now, Trick Time is on the button, which means he might be raising a plethora of hands here. For that reason, I think a re-raise with 10-8 suited is not completely out of the question. You know, just calling versus a button raise with a hand like this is totally normal, totally standard, you know, just going to a flop. But I do think balancing out strong holdings is important, and 10-8 suited isn't the worst candidate to do that with. Now, you don't want to do this every time. You can easily start to get a little little skewed towards always having trash and not enough good hands, but once in a blue moon, I think it's fair. So that's what I do this time. I make it $6,000. And now Trick Time decides he's had enough of this and puts in another raise to 16,400. Okay, so most likely the hand should have just ended here. You know, we've got 10-8 out of position versus a big raise, 16K. We should probably just fold. But that said, Trick Time has given me a lot of action across the last few streams. And not only does that make me want to play more pots against him, but I think it also means he might have a lot of hands here, like ace high, you know, suited connectors. Yeah, he's going to have the real hands too, but I think you guys get what I'm saying, which is this guy is here to play hands, and for that reason, 10-8 suited might be in better shape than what you otherwise might expect. Now, as you guys can see here, we're actually completely crushed versus ace 10, so he's got a 10 as well with a much better kicker, but that does not stop me in the moment because, of course, I don't know what he has. So I make the call, and we go heads up out of position, already over 30,000 in the pot. Oh, also, I should mention that a huge factor for me calling was that we're both really deep here. Now, this is too much pre-flop analysis, but when you're really deep, playing bad hands is actually not a good thing. It's a bad thing because, you know, hands like 10-8 suited could punish you for a lot of chips instead of just a few. But yeah, I was thinking about how deep we are. If we make a flush or a straight, it might be good news. So I make the call and we go to a flop of 9-5-4 with 2 hearts. So we've got 3 to a straight and, of course, the flush draw to go along with it. I check it and he bets small, 13,000. Now, you could check raise once in a while with just a 10 high flush draw. We don't have much showdown value. We could get folds from ace high, and of course we have plenty of outs. However, considering all the pre-flop raising, I don't know how often I should be check raising bad flush draws. I don't think it would have been a bad thing, but this time I just call and go to a turn. See what happens. Let's play some post-flop poker. Turn card looks good to me. It's the 10 of clubs, so we now improve to top pair, beating hands like ace high and such. As you guys can see, it's a complete disaster for me as both players have now improved to top pair. So we are looking for a heart or an 8 to improve. Aside from that, nothing is going to help us. I check it over to him, and after some thought, he now bets $40,425. Pretty odd bet size. I wonder why he didn't just bet 40,000. It's pretty irrelevant, but I'm curious about that. Either way, action's on me now, and he's got $100,000 behind. I do, for a brief moment, contemplate jamming all in, but I don't really get the point of that because the more I thought about it, the more I realized if I were to do that, we're just going to fold out hands that we're already beating with my 10, say hands like ace high for the most part. But then we're just going to get snap called by better hands like sets, any better 10, and of course the over pairs that he could have. So I don't really understand what a check raise all in would accomplish necessarily. For that reason, after some thought, I make the call. I am taking my time here though because this pot is huge and I want to make the best decisions I can. So I make the call and make the best decision of the night so far by deciding to hit a flush on the river. It's the 6 of hearts. Awesome news, hitting a flush in a very disguised fashion. Considering all the pre-flop raising that went on, neither player should have a flush too often here. So yeah, great news. Don't really want to lead out though. If I had jacks or a hand like queens, maybe ace 10 suited myself, I would never be leading out. And I just wouldn't have too many bluffs on this river regardless. So I don't think betting makes much sense. But of course I am afraid that he might just check back an overpair. He does not though, guys. Instead, he thinks for a minute and jams all in for just over $100,000. I, of course, snap call. If he's got a better flush, he's going to have to show me. But he does not. Instead, he says, you win. And just like that, guys, we are winning a $344,000 pot. This is the biggest pot that I've won this year. And it's actually one of the biggest pots I've ever played, if I'm not mistaken. I'm happy to see it go my way. And we ended up covering him by $400 or something like that. So we do get the absolute maximum. And out of nowhere, this 10-8 of hearts becomes a monster. And yeah, we win this huge, huge, huge pot. Pretty awesome. This stream is definitely going above expectation at this point, but there is much more poker to be played. A few hands later, this hand goes down where Trick Time raises up the action to 1,500. It's kind of funny, he's got ace-10 suited again. And I'm the only one who calls. I defend the straddle with 6 deuce suited. Probably should just be folding this one pre-flop, but here we go. Off to a flop of Jack 5 deuce with 1 spade out there. We've got bottom pair and a backdoor flush draw. It's a pretty dry board. I check it over to him and he bets 1,100. Now, we are going to occasionally flop hands like 5 deuce for 2 pair, Jack deuce, Jack 5 suited, and of course the obvious sets like pocket deuces and pocket 5s. If those hands want to check raise, we have to also come up with some bluffs to balance that out. And I think the good candidates are bottom pair with backdoor flush draws, maybe middle pair with backdoor flush draws. Would be nicer to also have the backdoor straight draw, but you can't have everything in life, I guess. 6 deuce of spades looks good enough to me, so I bump it up to 4,400. Springing into action here. Could get folds from ace high as well, king high, those sorts of holdings that have equity against bottom pair. So I do like this play. I make it 44. Trick Time makes the call, however, so I'm probably going to shut it down unless we get a good turn card to continue bluffing, which is a good one. It's the 9 of spades, so we do pick up one of those backdoor potential cards. So I continue betting. Trying to set up an all-in on the river. I bet 9,000 this time. It's not going to be fun for him if he's got a jack or even an overpair. I wouldn't be loving the situation if I were him. So I'm expecting a fold or a call. Instead, Trick Time jams all in for just under $30,000. Now this hand just becomes a math problem for me. We've got bottom pair and the flush draw. So are we getting odds to call? It obviously depends on what we put Trick Time on. And I think he could, of course, have a jack, but he might just be going with it, say with a hand like Queen 10 suited or 10-8 suited that floats the flop with some backdoor possibilities. He might even have a flush draw himself, a hand exactly like what he's got that floats the flop and picks up equity on the turn, decides to just go with it. And if that's the case, we should definitely be calling since the deuce is good enough to win it. So yeah, I think it over for a bit and, the hell with it. It's a pretty close spot. We might have the best hand. And if we end up doubling up Trick Time after that previous pot, it's not that bad, Got to give some action here and there. So I make the call after some thought. Turns out we are in great shape, 70-30 to win this one. Decide to run it once, but the river is an ace. Damn it. So we end up losing this one. Would have been pretty cool to win this one. We would have been on a sick heater for this session. Momentum would have been pretty strong. But instead we give some back here. And I guess it's only fair since I got pretty lucky against him on the previous river card. In this next hand, I am one of the last 2 players remaining in stand-up that needs to win a hand. It's me versus Henry. I raise it up to 600. Sashimi calls. I've got 8-4 suited. Frank also calls, and now Henry puts in a re-raise from the big blind. He makes it 3,400. Back to me now. I've got position, and I've got to defend my honor. One of us is going to lose this hand, and with that, lose the stand-up game. So I make the call. Of course, I don't expect to have the best hand, but it's somewhat playable, and like I said, we've got position. So we go to a flop of 5-4 deuce. Henry bets blind before the cards even come out. He puts in, how much was this? 2,300. I contemplate raising here for a little bit, but 4 is probably good enough, so I just call, and we see the 3 of spades on the turn, which absolutely sucks because if Henry has an ace, he of course now has a straight, so I'm probably done with this one, but he checks it. I just check it back, I guess. Don't really want to pretend I have a 6 because I don't think Henry's going to fold an ace, so I just check it back. But then the river is a really cool card. It's a 6, which means there's a straight out there, and if he's got an ace, it doesn't even play anymore because we're both just playing the board. Henry now checks it over to me, and it's really just a question of who's going to have a 6 more often, and I think we all know the answer to that. It's going to be me. We also have the stand-up game in play, like I said, so definitely time to bluff. I decided to just go crazy and bet more than double the size of the pot, $30,000 into 13K, hoping to put Henry in a miserable spot. Sure enough, that's what happens. He does not love the situation. He's either going to call and chop or call and lose a huge pot. I don't envy his decision at all, but in the end, he ends up folding. We show this one, and we win the hand and avoid losing stand-up, so pretty good result. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last fun hand of tonight's vlog, tonight's stream. Lots of hands have been discussed today. We're going to end it with this one right here. Action Dan, he's had a rough night. He's got 30K left at this point, and it gets to him in the big blind. He raises to 1,600. I am in one of the straddles. I forget if it was the 800 at this point. But either way, I've got ace king. It's worth a raise. I make it $4,600. Back to Action Dan now, and he decides the hell with it. I am all in for 30K. I, of course, snap call with ace king, and we are in amazing shape as he's got king queen. Once again, we are looking pretty good to win a big pot here. 64,000 in the middle. We elect to run it twice, and well, I'll just let you guys see these runouts for yourselves.
Well, Dan's got a shot. Needs a 10. There it is. Hello. Hello. Hello, Lucy.
Not washed.
Told you would have hit that.
Can he do it a second time? Uh-oh. SpaghettiOs. Will we see another 10 ball? Oh, wow!
That's nuts.
The poker gods gave a little rebate.
That's crazy.
So sick.
So yeah, what has been a very good night so far, and somewhat disappointingly, we end up losing two pretty big pots, one against Trick Time and one against Action Dan. We were up a bunch of money after the 10-8 of hearts hand, but things don't go as planned for the last couple hours. But that's okay. That's how it goes. That's gambling. In the end, we still had a pretty decent night. If you guys want to hear the final results of all these sessions, stay tuned for the outro. As always, I hope you all enjoy the hands. Yeah, so as you guys saw, a lot of big pots, a lot of strange hands, as is the case most of the time on Hustler. But in the end, things ended up working out for me, luckily. I had a rough start to this year, results-wise at least. I wasn't winning too much and mostly losing. But finally, things have turned around and we are up for the year a good amount. Here is the results from the last 6 sessions. I believe that's how many we covered on today's vlog. And like I said during the voiceover, if you guys enjoyed this video and you got some good entertainment out of it, leave a thumbs up for Joey. He's the guy who helps me edit all these, another childhood friend. He's not here today. Instead, he's working on this video that you guys are watching. So show him some support, show him some love. And yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. As always, thanks for watching. Thank you guys for following the journey. And there's more poker coming up from different places. I'm going to the Lodge next weekend. Then I'm going back to Vegas. And I might even play a 1-3 game here in Pismo Beach tonight. Not sure if I'll be able to get a vlog out of that. We'll see. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for watching. Until next time, good luck at the tables. Peace.